Mega Man series represents one of the most fascinating rises and falls in gaming history. It began with a title often cited as the pinnacle of 16-bit action platforming, evolved through the PS1 era with dynamic storytelling, and then it hit an identity crisis in PS2. The franchise's later years were defined by a struggle to adapt to 3D. However, amidst the decline of the mid-2000s, one title emerged as a stabilized, competent, and genuinely high-quality action game: Mega Man X8. It stands as a significant course correction, offering a polished final chapter to a saga that definitely needed redemption.
Huh?
So where did X8 even come from? To understand the existence of Mega Man X8, we must first understand the dire state of the franchise during the early 2000s. This period was characterized by a rushed transition to modern hardware that nearly destroyed the series' reputation. Mega Man X6 was released hastily on the PS1 with a notoriously bad localization and level design issue, while Mega Man X7 attempted to force the series into full 3D on the PS2 with catastrophic results. X7 is widely considered the franchise's worst, introducing slow, clunky movement, a problematic targeting system, and camera angles that made precision platforming nigh impossible. Mega Man X8 was developed specifically as a response to this backlash, serving as a Hail Mary to salvage the brand's integrity. Capcom Production Studio 1 recognized that the shift to 3D gameplay in X7 had fundamentally broken the game feel, and thus X8 was greenlit with a specific mandate to undo those changes. It was a project defined by constraint and sheer focus. Whereas previous titles tried to expand the scope with 3D exploration, X8 tightened the scope to ensure functional gameplay mechanics. It ultimately became the final mainline entry in the X series, a lower budget, but a determined effort to provide a conclusion that respected the series' roots rather than leaving it on a sour note with X7. The game stands as a testament to the developer's ability to admit defeat, analyze their mistakes, and course correct, which is sadly all too rare in this industry. The people behind X8 and what they wanted. The Reclamation project was led by Capcom Production Studio 1, the internal team that had stewarded the franchise through its various ups and downs throughout the year. Series producer Keiji Inafune and his team of veteran staff members returned with a clear vision to strip away the modernization that had cluttered X7 and rebuild it as a proper Mega Man X game from the ground up for the PS2 hardware. Their objective was not to chase the industry trend of open movement 3D action games, but to refine the character control and responsiveness that had defined the 16-bit era of the franchise. Development notes from the time indicate a strong desire to clean up the visual and mechanical presentation, which had become muddy and confusing in the previous entry. The team wanted to create a game where the player felt in complete control of the character's action, prioritizing responsive movement, high-speed dashing, and precision jumping over the sluggish exploration found in X7. They had aimed to utilize the power of the PS2 not for expansive environment, but for fluid controls and animation, and detailed character models that reacted instantly to input. Now, this shift in design philosophy was essential. It caused the development focus to move away from fighting the controls back toward fighting enemies. It was a grounded approach that sought to stabilize the chaotic trajectory set by X7 by focusing on the fundamentals of action platforming rather than technological gimmicks. Why X8 went with old-school 2.5D? The most critical decision made during development was the abandonment of the full 3D gameplay model introduced in X7. Mega Man X8 utilized a 2.5D perspective, meaning the game world and characters were rendered with 3D polygons, but the gameplay was strictly locked to a 2D side-scrolling gameplay. At the time, reverting to 2D gameplay on the powerful PS2 was seen as a backwards bad move because, at the time, gamers were extremely excited about the new 3D features the advanced tech of the PS2 offered. That said, Inafune and his team correctly identified that full 3D movement technology and design, at the time, was not sufficient enough to meet the demands of a Mega Man X game. And so, by locking the camera, The developers solved the visibility and camera control issues that plagued the PS2 era, ensuring players could always see the next platform and enemy clearly. This perspective shift allowed for the return of intricate vertical level design that required wall kicking and air dashing, mechanics that felt loose and imprecise in other 3D games of the time. It provided the visual fidelity of the PS2 with dynamic lighting, depth of field, and 3D backgrounds, while retaining the tight, razor-sharp controls of the Super Nintendo Classic. This decision effectively bridged the gap between generations, proving that the series could look modern without sacrificing the gameplay that made it popular in the first place. The 2.5D style essentially removed the struggle with the controls factor that plagued a lot of platformers at the time, allowing the difficulty to come from the level design itself rather than the camera. How X8 fixes what X6 and X7 got wrong. When analyzing the mechanics, Mega Man X8 functions as a direct counter to the design failures of Mega Man X6 and X7. X6 was criticized for its nightmare system, which had introduced random, often unavoidable stage hazards, while X7 was panned for its incredibly slow movement speed and auto-aim system that removed player skill from combat. X8 rectified these issues by introducing the double hero system, which allowed players to select two of the three hunters, X, Zero, or Axel, and be able to switch between them instantly mid-combat with zero latency. This mechanic opened up a new layer of combat depth, allowing players to chain X's ranged buster shots into Zero's melee combos fluidly. Truly a far cry from the clunky character swapping of the previous title. Furthermore, the game introduced a guard break mechanic and the screen-clearing double attack mechanic that encouraged aggressive, rhythmic play rather than the passive, defensive style encouraged by X7. The level design also saw a massive improvement. Stages were designed with clear readability, avoiding the leap of faith death that plagued platformers. Mechanics like Axel's copy shot were refined to be useful puzzle-solving tools rather than afterthoughts, giving each of the three characters distinct and viable utility in gameplay. Reviews from the period highlighted this polish, noting that the game finally felt like a finished product rather than a proof of concept. It was a systematic cleanup of the franchise's mechanics, proving that the core formula was still viable if treated with respect and design competence. From seamless character switching to inventive boss gimmicks, variety drives every encounter. The structural core of Mega Man X8 is defined by its double hero system, which transforms character selection from a passive preference into an active, strategic necessity. Players deploy as two hunters out of three, seamlessly toggling between them to adapt to shifting combat scenarios instantly. X functions as the balanced hunter with his chargeable buster. Zero delivers close-range high damage with his saber and technique input, and Axel provides utility through rapid-fire directional aiming and hovering capability. This strategic flexibility allows for complex combo strings where players can initiate with ranged harassment from Axel and then finish with a melee onslaught with Zero. Crucially, the system also incorporates a forgiving survival mechanic. If the active character is killed, the game does not immediately game over. Instead, the reserve partner automatically swaps in to continue the fight, creating a dynamic where players must carefully manage two separate health bars. This philosophy of variety extends to the level design and the 8 central Maverick bosses. The developers ensured that no two stages play exactly alike by integrating distinct environmental gimmicks into every mission. Players could be navigating gravity-inverting puzzles, stealth-based infiltration segments, and high-speed ride chaser vehicle courses. While the inclusion of these vehicle-heavy stages remains a divisive point among fans, they succeed in breaking up the pacing to prevent monotony. The boss battles themselves return to the franchise's Metroidvania-like roots, where defeating a Maverick yields a weapon that's necessary to get through a different stage and Maverick. This connected progression keeps the gameplay loop engaging, encouraging players to experiment with new weapons across the differing playstyles of the three hunters. What critics and fans actually thought. Upon its release, the critical reception for Mega Man X8 was favorable, though marked by a sense of relief rather than praise. Critics and outlets acknowledged that while it wasn't revolutionary, it was a vast improvement over the disastrous X7 and the frustrating X6. Reviewers specifically praised the return to 2D mechanics and the sharper visual presentation, noting that Capcom had finally managed to translate the Mega Man formula to the PS2 hardware effectively. It was seen as competent, a game that stopped the franchise's free fall, even if it didn't reach the legendary cult status of X1 or X4. Over the subsequent decades, however, the feelings regarding X8 have grown significantly more positive. In modern retrospective discussions, particularly following the release of the Mega Man X Legacy Collection 2, X8 is frequently cited as the underrated gem of the later series. Fans now often rank it alongside X5 as one of the few worthwhile entries in the post-SNES era, praising its replayability, the depth of its weapon systems, and its attempt to give the storyline a proper conclusion. It had shed its contemporary stigma to be recognized as a high-quality action platformer in its own right. The community often points to the game's hard mode and unlockable content as evidence that it was made for the hardcore fans who stuck with the series through the dark times. A strong game that still struggled commercially. Despite the significant improvements in quality and design, Mega Man X8 faced an uphill battle in the marketplace due to the context of its release. By late 2004 and early 2005, the Mega Man brand was suffering from severe oversaturation. Capcom had been releasing multiple titles annually across the Battle Network, Zero, and Classic series. Thus, it led to the widespread consumer fatigue of the series. Additionally, the mainstream audience had been burned twice in a row by the poor quality of X6 and X7, making them hesitant to trust another sequel in the X line, regardless of reviews. As a result, Mega Man X8 is often discussed as one of the lowest-selling mainline entries in the franchise. While precise sales figures from Capcom are often aggregated in collections, historical tracking suggests it failed to recapture the massive commercial success of PS1-era game. It stands as a tragic example of a quality product failing because of the damage done to the brand's reputation. The game did everything it could in its design and development, but the market apathy and difficulty marketing the X series had already solidified by the time it hit shelves. It was a critical success in terms of restoring quality, but the game needed a better PR and marketing budget if it wanted to change the hearts of consumers at the time in order to be a commercial success. What X8's fate meant for the series. The commercial performance of Mega Man X8, combined with a general decline of the brand's popularity in the mid-2000s, effectively placed the Mega Man X series into permanent hiatus. It marked the end of the line for the original continuity, meaning no new Mega Man X games or media or any news, really, for like 2 decades, without a new numbered entry. The Mega Man franchise itself pivoted away from console action, surviving primarily through handheld spin-offs, cameos in fighting games, and eventually returned in Legacy Collection. For years, it appeared that the X series had simply been abandoned, a relic of a bygone era. However, in the context of the series' entire history, X8 serves as a dignified and respectable finale. Modern collections and retrospectives treat it as the conclusion of the saga, wrapping up the Axel storyline and the conflict with Sigma in a way that provides closure. Even though, the cliffhanger ending hinted at more. It ensured that the series ended on a note of competence rather than the disappointment of X7. It stands today as the proud final chapter, a solid action game that proved the X formula worked, leaving the door slightly ajar should Capcom ever decide to revisit the Maverick Hunter. It remains a testament to the developer's ability to self-reflect and self-correct, providing a high note for a series that defined a generation.
Give up now.
Marvelous verdict. Mega Man X8 remains a definitive example of how a developer can salvage a franchise by returning to the basics. It successfully navigated the treacherous transition of the PS2 era by rejecting the industry's forced march toward 3D and embracing the precision of 2D gameplay. For those investigating the history of the genre, it stands not just as a correction of past mistakes, but as a genuinely excellent action platformer that holds up against the best of the series. It is the worthy conclusion the Maverick Hunters deserve.